Welcome to a journey through one of the most influential characters in human history, a figure whose existence shaped moral codes, social systems, and personal fears, yet one that was never truly real. We're talking about Satan, the idea of a cosmic enemy, a force of ultimate evil, a shadow always lurking to tempt and destroy. But where did this character come from? Was he always there in the beginning, or was he an invention, shaped and reshaped over centuries to serve purposes far removed from pure spirituality? What's fascinating is that if you look closely at the earliest texts that would later form the backbone of Western religion, the Satan we think we know is nowhere to be found. There's no horned devil ruling over a fiery underworld. There's no eternal kingdom of darkness waging war against God. Those images belong to a later invention, the result of centuries of cultural evolution, political struggles, and psychological needs. In the Hebrew Bible, the starting point for the traditions that gave us Satan, the word Satan doesn't even refer to a proper name. It's a title. It means adversary or accuser. And in those early stories, the adversary isn't a rebellious angel raging against God. He works for God. In the book of Job, for instance, the Satan is like a prosecutor in a divine courtroom. His job is to test human loyalty, to challenge their integrity. That's not a prince of darkness. That's an agent of the divine system, carrying out a role under divine permission. The entire image of a cosmic rebel simply isn't there. So where did this transformation happen? It began during a time of crisis, when the Jewish people were exiled in Babylon. Exposure to Persian dualism, especially Zoroastrian ideas, planted seeds of a cosmic battle between good and evil. Zoroastrianism had Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness. That framework influenced Jewish thought. Gradually, the adversary in Hebrew texts began to take on traits of an independent being opposed to God. Evil stopped being just disobedience or injustice. It became a personality. This idea grew stronger during the Second Temple period, a time when apocalyptic literature flourished. Books like Enoch and Jubilees, though not part of the official canon, were incredibly influential. They introduced stories about rebellious angels, fallen watchers, and demonic forces corrupting the world. Suddenly, evil wasn't just human failure, it was cosmic conspiracy. And when the early Christian movement emerged, it inherited this worldview. But Christianity didn't just inherit it, it amplified it. Enter the New Testament. Here, Satan becomes central. He tempts Jesus in the wilderness. He's called the prince of this world. He enters Judas to trigger betrayal, and for the first time Satan is depicted not just as an opponent, but as the embodiment of evil. Why? Because early Christians were a small, persecuted group in a hostile empire. They needed a way to explain suffering and persecution without blaming God. They needed a villain big enough to make sense of the chaos. Satan filled that role perfectly. He became the ultimate scapegoat, responsible for temptation, heresy, and opposition. Every problem could now be framed as part of a larger spiritual war. This wasn't just theology, it was survival strategy. As Christianity spread, Satan's image evolved further. By the time the church became an institution tied to empire, the devil became political. Label someone a servant of Satan, and you strip them of legitimacy. Heretics weren't just wrong, they were agents of hell. Rivals weren't just opponents, they were soldiers of darkness. This framing justified crusades, inquisitions, and executions. Fear of the devil wasn't just about personal sin anymore. It was a weapon of control. And the more elaborate the devil's mythology became, the more effective that weapon grew. Think about the Middle Ages. Art and literature filled with grotesque images of demons, hellfire, and eternal torment. Preachers painted vivid pictures of the horrors awaiting sinners. These weren't harmless stories, they were psychological chains. In a world without modern science, where disease, famine, and disaster seemed random, people needed explanations. And the church offered one. Evil spirits at work, led by the devil himself. But conveniently, the church also offered the cure: obedience, confession, payment for indulgences. Fear created dependence, dependence created power, and the devil became central to that cycle. But the devil wasn't static. His image kept changing, adapting to cultural anxieties. During the witch hunts of early modern Europe, Satan became a conspirator, recruiting humans into pacts. Accusations of witchcraft exploded not because the world suddenly became more sinful, but because society needed scapegoats for economic and social turmoil. The devil made it easy. Women, the poor, outsiders, label them servants of Satan, and you can eliminate them without guilt. The Salem witch trials in colonial America were a late echo of this same pattern. Fear weaponized through a character whose existence was never proven, but whose influence felt real because everyone believed in it. Even the details we take for granted, the horns, the pitchfork, the red skin, are late additions. They don't come from scripture, they come from art, folklore, and satire. Medieval artists borrowed symbols from pagan gods like Pan to visualize evil. Later, poets like Milton and Dante turned Satan into a complex, almost heroic figure, a rebel with tragic depth. Those literary portrayals still shape our imagination today. But again, none of this reflects an eternal truth. It reflects human creativity layered on top of fear, power, and cultural need. So why invent Satan at all? Why did humans need a cosmic enemy? The answer lies in psychology. Humans struggle with complexity. We want clear categories, good and evil, us and them, order and chaos. Life without those categories feels overwhelming. A figure like Satan simplifies the problem. Instead of wrestling with why suffering exists or why people commit harm, you can point to an external force. Evil becomes an invader, not a part of us. That makes the world easier to explain and easier to control. If evil is out there, then salvation is in here, under the authority of those claiming to fight it. This invention also feeds on fear of death. Eternal torment is the ultimate deterrent. Promise people paradise for obedience and threaten hell for disobedience, and you have a moral system that enforces itself. You don't need constant surveillance when people believe an invisible judge tracks every thought. That's power without cost, and it's power many institutions were eager to wield. Even today, in an age of science and reason, the shadow of Satan lingers. In some cultures, fear of the devil still drives laws, education, and politics. In others, he appears in subtler forms. Conspiracy theories framing opponents as agents of evil. Rhetoric about spiritual warfare in cultural debates. The names and faces change, but the mechanism remains. Define an enemy so absolute that compromise feels like betrayal, and you can rally people to almost anything. That's why understanding the invention of Satan matters. It's not just history, it's a map of how fear can be manufactured and manipulated. And the most revealing truth? Evil doesn't need a face. It doesn't need horns or fire or wings. Real evil is ignorance, greed, cruelty, and those are human, not supernatural. But as long as people believe in a cosmic villain, they may never see the real danger. The choices we make, the systems we build, the power we surrender because someone told us a story about a devil. The invention of Satan was not a single event. It wasn't like someone wrote the word on a tablet and declared, "Here is the enemy of God." It was a process, slow, layered, and opportunistic. That's important because it shows us something crucial. Satan was never about truth. He was about need. Human beings have always faced two overwhelming problems: why bad things happen and why we do bad things ourselves. Those questions are hard because they don't have easy answers. Blaming a cosmic villain solves both. Think about it. If crops fail, if disease spreads, if war destroys your home, you can either accept the randomness of life or believe someone is behind it. Randomness is terrifying because it means no control. But a villain? That gives the chaos structure. If there's an enemy, there's a reason for your pain, and maybe even a solution. Fight the enemy, purge evil, obey the forces of good. This belief reduces anxiety and offers hope, even if the enemy doesn't exist. And people will do almost anything for that sense of order. They'll obey laws, pay money, fight wars, all because they've been convinced there's a battle between heaven and hell. This mechanism works even better when guilt is added. Humans aren't just victims of suffering, we're creators of it. We hurt each other, we betray, we lie, and that's hard to live with. So religions offered a story. You're not entirely to blame. There's a tempter whispering in your ear, a shadow forcing your hand. Satan became a psychological scapegoat for human weakness. Instead of admitting that cruelty, greed, and violence come from inside us, people projected them onto an external being. The devil made me do it might sound like a joke today, but for centuries it was deadly serious. It allowed people to feel flawed yet redeemable because evil wasn't entirely theirs. As societies grew more complex, so did Satan. Early agricultural communities didn't need a cosmic villain. They explained disaster through spirits or angry gods. But when monotheism emerged, a new problem appeared. If there's only one all-powerful God, where does evil come from? Why do children die? Why do earthquakes destroy cities? Why do tyrants prosper? This is called the problem of evil, and it's devastating for any religion claiming an all-good, all-powerful deity. You can't blame another god because monotheism forbids that. So the solution was brilliant in its simplicity. Invent a subordinate being who turned against the Creator. Evil becomes rebellion, not divine failure. And so Satan, as an independent force, became essential to preserve God's perfection. The timing wasn't random. This idea took shape during periods of crisis. The Jews in Babylonian exile needed to explain why their temple was destroyed, why their chosen status didn't shield them. The answer couldn't be that God failed or abandoned them. That would collapse faith. So the blame shifted outward to forces of darkness, to spiritual enemies. This pattern repeats throughout history. When reality doesn't fit theology, theology changes to protect itself. And often that means creating new characters, like Satan. Greek and Roman influences also shaped the devil's image. As Christianity spread through the empire, it absorbed ideas from surrounding cultures. Pagan gods were rebranded as demons. Symbols of fertility, like Pan with his horns and hooves, became models for Satan's appearance. This wasn't accidental, it was propaganda. By turning old gods into devils, the church could demonize rival religions, both literally and figuratively. And the message was clear: your gods are evil, your traditions corrupt, join us or burn with them. In that way, the invention of Satan didn't just explain suffering, it became a weapon for conquest. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is how this myth justified cruelty. When you convince people that a cosmic enemy threatens their souls, anything becomes permissible in the name of defense. Torture heretics, kill witches, burn entire villages suspected of devil worship. All becomes righteous when framed as war against ultimate evil. Historian Jeffrey Burton Russell called this the logic of persecution. If the devil is behind dissent, then dissenters aren't just wrong, they're agents of apocalypse. That thinking fueled some of the darkest chapters in human history. And notice something else. The devil's power always grows when institutions seek control. In early Christianity, Satan wasn't central. By the Middle Ages, he dominated sermons, art, and law. Why? Because the church needed a monopoly on salvation. The more terrifying hell became, the more desperate people were for heaven. And who controlled the path to heaven? The church. This wasn't random theology, it was an economy of fear. Salvation became a currency, and Satan was the debt collector everyone feared. Even language reflects this conditioning. Words like satanic or diabolical aren't just insults, they trigger centuries of cultural programming. They make evil feel otherworldly, almost mystical, when in reality it's painfully human. That's the ultimate irony. The devil distracts us from the real sources of harm: ignorance, greed, power, lust. As long as we're busy hunting demons, we're not questioning kings or priests. So ask yourself, what happens when a story like this becomes embedded in the collective mind for over 1,000 years? It shapes everything: laws, art, politics, identity. It builds mental cages so strong that people will fight and die to defend them. And yet, the entire structure stands on air. No evidence, no proof, just words repeated until they feel like truth. That's the power of myth, and few myths have been more potent or more dangerous than the invention of Satan. But the story doesn't end here. In the next part, we'll explore how the Enlightenment began to dismantle this myth, how literature like Paradise Lost humanized Satan, and why, even in a secular age, the devil still haunts our culture. Because this isn't just about history, it's about the persistence of fear and the systems that feed on it. The Enlightenment was a turning point. For centuries, fear of Satan had been like a shadow across Europe, influencing everything from law to art to daily behavior. But something began to change in the 17th and 18th centuries. Science rose, reason challenged dogma, and thinkers started asking questions that religious authorities didn't want to hear. Where is the evidence for this being of ultimate evil? If God created everything, then who created the devil? Why would an all-powerful God allow such a creature to exist? These questions didn't destroy religion overnight, but they cracked the foundation of fear that institutions had relied on for so long. What's interesting is how Satan didn't disappear when belief weakened. He changed roles. In literature, he went from a terrifying demon to a complex character, even a tragic hero. John Milton's Paradise Lost, written in the 17th century, gave Satan depth and dignity. He wasn't just evil for evil's sake. He was proud, ambitious, defiant. Milton didn't intend to glorify the devil, but readers saw something compelling in this figure who would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven. Later, romantic poets like Byron and Shelley ran with this image, turning Satan into a symbol of rebellion against tyranny. Ironically, the very character once used to enforce obedience became an emblem of freedom in art and thought. That shift reveals something profound. When myths lose their grip as fear, they survive as metaphor. But while intellectual circles reimagined Satan, religious institutions fought back. During times of social upheaval, the devil returned as a weapon. In the Great Awakenings of the 18th and 19th centuries, preachers in America revived fiery sermons about hell and Satan's snares. Why? Because revivals thrive on urgency, and nothing creates urgency like eternal danger. Fear sells, even when reason grows. The same pattern appeared in colonial settings, where missionaries framed indigenous beliefs as devil worship to justify conversion. Every cultural clash became a spiritual war because labeling the other as satanic made conquest feel righteous. This wasn't just about faith, it was about power and expansion. Then came the 20th century, an age of science, technology, and global conflict. You might expect Satan to vanish in a modern rational world. But did he? Not at all. He adapted again, moving from pulpits to popular culture. Horror films like The Exorcist terrified millions with images of possession and demonic evil. Books, music, even heavy metal bands turned Satan into an icon of rebellion, shock, and entertainment. Some groups even adopted satanic imagery as a way to provoke or challenge religious norms, not because they believed in the devil, but because the symbol had power. It still does. That tells us something important. Myths don't die. They mutate. But here's the real question. Why does fear of Satan still linger when so many people doubt his existence? The answer lies in the emotional architecture built over centuries. Fear is sticky. It embeds itself in language, rituals, and stories passed down through families. A child raised hearing about hell absorbs that fear before reason develops. Even adults who leave religion often report feeling echoes of it. A twinge of guilt, a whisper of anxiety. That's how deep the conditioning runs. And this conditioning isn't accidental. It was cultivated deliberately because fear is the strongest form of control. If you can make people afraid of something invisible, you can control them without chains. You can make them censor their own thoughts, guard their own behavior, enforce their own obedience. Psychologists call this internalized authority. It's one of the most efficient tools ever invented because it doesn't need constant supervision. People become their own jailers, terrified not of human punishment but of supernatural judgment. And Satan was the perfect instrument for this. He turned morality into a battlefield and life into a test you could fail at any moment. What does that do to a person's mental state? It breeds anxiety, guilt, and conformity. That's not spirituality, that's behavioral engineering. And it worked for over 1,000 years. Even today, the devil appears in political rhetoric, often in subtle ways. Leaders invoke evil forces threatening society, cultural movements branded as satanic, opponents framed as demonic conspirators. These words aren't chosen by accident. They tap into a deep cultural reservoir of fear. The devil becomes a floating signifier, a label you can stick on anything you want people to hate. It turns disagreement into moral panic, and moral panic is a powerful engine for obedience. But notice something remarkable. Every stage of Satan's evolution tells us less about the cosmos and more about us, about our fears, our need for control, our struggle with guilt, and our craving for meaning. The devil didn't climb out of a pit. He climbed out of the human mind. He is our shadow, projected onto the sky. And that makes this myth both fascinating and tragic, because while we were hunting demons in the dark, we ignored the real demons inside us: ignorance, cruelty, greed. Those forces destroyed more lives than any imagined devil ever could. As we move to the next part, we'll explore one final dimension: why this myth survives in modern times, even in secular societies, and what happens when people start breaking free from it. Does the world become more moral or less? Does losing Satan make us safer or more vulnerable to new kinds of fear? These questions matter, because even if the devil was invented, the fear he represents is very real. Even in today's world, where science explains storms and medicine fights disease, the ghost of Satan still lingers. You see it in whispers about secret cults, in viral conspiracy theories about global plots, in claims that entertainment is demonic. These ideas don't survive because people truly see a red-skinned figure lurking in shadows. They survive because fear doesn't need proof. It needs a story, and Satan remains one of the most powerful stories ever told. The psychological residue of this myth runs deep. If you grew up hearing about eternal punishment, that imprint doesn't vanish overnight. Even after leaving religion, many people admit they still feel uneasy when questioning sacred ideas. That's not logic, it's conditioning. Fear rewires the brain. And when that fear is tied to the ultimate stakes, your soul, eternity, it becomes almost unbreakable. That's why the invention of Satan was so effective. It turned faith into a security system for authority, locked from the inside by those it controlled. But what happens when that fear fades? History suggests something interesting. Societies that loosen their grip on supernatural evil often become more tolerant, less violent, and more curious. The Enlightenment didn't make humans perfect, but it shifted morality from divine decree to human reason. Instead of asking, "Will this damn me?" people began asking, "Will this harm others?" That's a healthier question because it's rooted in reality, not terror. And the decline of Satan belief didn't unleash chaos. It reduced persecution. Witch hunts ended not because Satan was defeated, but because people stopped believing in the war that justified them. That's an important lesson. Fear creates cruelty, even when it claims to fight evil. Yet the myth adapts. In secular societies, Satan rarely appears in sermons, but fear finds new masks. Political ideologies brand opponents as existential threats. Marketing sells us salvation in the form of products. promising escape from inadequacy. The structure is the same. Invent a danger, then offer the cure. The devil may have left the pulpit, but the psychology he embodied lives on. That's why understanding his invention matters, because if we can see how fear was manufactured in the past, we can recognize when it's being manufactured now. Breaking free from this myth isn't about mocking belief, it's about reclaiming responsibility. When we stop blaming an invisible enemy, we confront the real sources of harm: ignorance, exploitation, systems built on inequality. Those problems can be solved, but only if we stop chasing phantoms, and that means facing an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't whisper from the shadows. It speaks through human actions, choices, and structure. That realization is harder than believing in a devil because it puts the burden on us. But it's also liberating, because if evil is human, then so is the power to overcome it. So the next time you hear someone invoke Satan to explain suffering or justify control, ask yourself, who benefits from this fear? Who gains when people see the world as a battlefield between unseen forces? The answer is almost always the same: those who want obedience, those who profit from panic, those who fear a world where people think for themselves. And that's the ultimate irony. The devil was invented to keep us in chains, but the key was always in our hands, our ability to question, to reason, to see the story for what it is. Thank you for listening to this journey. If it gave you something to think about, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe myths like this still shape our world? Have you felt their shadow in your own life? Let's talk about it, because the more light we bring to these old fears, the less power they have over the future.